On a frigid January night in 2022, Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found lifeless in the snow outside of 34 Fairview Road in Canton, Massachusetts. His body battered, bloodied, and exposed to a brutal nor'eastern storm. What began as a tragic loss of a decorated officer quickly spiraled into one of the most controversial and emotionally charged trials in recent memory. His girlfriend, Karen Reed, once a finance professor, now stands accused of second-degree murder. Prosecutors say she struck O'Keefe with her SUV after a night of drinking, then left him to die. But Reed's defense paints a darker tale, a conspiracy, a cover-up, a house full of secrets where fellow officers allegedly knew more than they let on. The first jury could not reach a unanimous verdict in 2024, and now the stakes are even higher in the retrial. Today, the prosecution rested their case in chief. Did they prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Karen Reed is a murderer? Tonight, we are live from the courthouse with all the big moments as the retrial of the century continues. I'm Vinnie Politan. Thank you so much for joining us tonight here on Closing Arguments. Whew, this was a big day when you think about it. A huge day because today was the end of the prosecution's case. Now, let's talk about a few concepts here that are really important. Burden of proof. You've heard those three words so many times. But I want you to really understand burden of proof and what it really means. As a former prosecutor, I know, and I knew back then, that is something that we as prosecutors carry into the courtroom. We have the burden of proving the case in criminal court beyond a reasonable doubt. And understanding beyond a reasonable doubt, well, that's a challenge because it means different things to different people and different things to different jurors. When I think of beyond a reasonable doubt, I think of like 97% proof. You know, it's like that high. There's nothing reasonable that's left. But for other jurors, it may mean something completely different. And it is so important in our system of justice because that is the burden. And it's up to prosecutors to bring in the evidence. So Hank Brennan, by resting today, said, we proved it. The only stuff that I need to prove this case, you've already seen, ladies and gentlemen. Now, he might present some evidence in a rebuttal case, but that has nothing to do with him meeting his burden. And you put in anything and everything you need to meet that burden before you say those words, we rest. So based upon what has been put in front of this jury right now, the prosecution believes that they have proven their case beyond any and all reasonable doubt, that they have carried their burden of proof. That's where we are in this trial. It's time for the defense. But the defense, they have no burden. They have no burden. They don't have to prove anything. There have been cases and trials here on court TV and very common in day-to-day trials around the country where the defense puts on no evidence. They put on no case. Their case is about pointing out how the other side didn't prove their case because they're the ones that had the burden. But I don't think that's this case necessarily. Like, they're obviously going to make the argument that they didn't prove it, but they're not going to sit back at this point and say that. They have evidence, they have witnesses, they have a case that they're going to bring. And obviously there's always a big question about whether or not the defendant will testify. We'll talk about that at a later time. But what will they do with Higgins, Proctor, and Albert? These three men were the focal point of the first trial for the defense. Trooper Proctor in the middle of it all, painted as a dirty cop who was biased and was out to get Karen Reed and took part in the frame job. And they had Brian Higgins and Brian Albert, who were at 34 Fairview. And those are the ones that they're going to point the finger at. They're the ones who really did it. They're the ones responsible. But none of the three have testified. In the first trial, they all testified during the prosecution's case. But in the retrial, not so much. We haven't heard from them. So the question is, what will they do? Will the defense actually call these three witnesses who are absolutely adverse to their case? They all believe Karen Reed's a killer. They believe Karen Reed's a murderer. So will the defense call him? We're going to talk about that tonight. But first, what a big day. And Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson, of course, in the middle of it all, joining us from outside the courthouse in Dedham tonight. And oh boy, he's got the winter jacket back on. It's getting cold again in Dedham. Just when we thought spring had sprung.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, a little chilly. All right, chilly outside, but what happened inside today? What happened in the courtroom?
Very heated inside the courtroom here at this courthouse behind me in Dedham, Massachusetts. Outside the presence of the jury, the day started with those heated arguments between Brennan facing off with Alessi over Trooper Paul and Paul's report from last year. He was the crash reconstructionist. And whether or not Welcher was using his report for his analysis. Well, at the end of the day, Judge Beverly Cannoni decided that he could not be cross-examined, this new witness, for the retrial on Trooper Paul's findings from last year. And so the questioning continued, and Welcher was back on the stand for cross. There was some more questioning, including about his findings this year. Take a listen.
You want this jury, sir, to conclude that the glancing blow that you contend occurred at 34 Fairview Road by the same 6,000-pound Lexus in contact with a mere 216-pound man did register an event on the Lexus, correct?
No. The impact didn't register the event. As I pointed out, the trigger was from when the accelerator pedal went to 30%. The tech stream does not register crashes at all.
Then there was the huge punctuation point in the courthouse behind me where Hank Brennan played yet another clip of this defendant and then rested. Let's watch it.
So I thought, could I have run him over? Did he try to get me as I was leaving and I didn't know it? I mean, I've always got the music blasting. It's snowing. I got the wipers going, the heater blasting. Did he come and hit the back of my car and I hit him in the knee and he was drunk and passed out and asphyxiated or something? And then when I hired David Yannetti, I asked him those questions the night of January 29th. Like, David, what if, I don't know, what if I ran his foot over or what if I clipped him in the knee and he passed out or went to care for himself and he threw up or passed out? And David said, yeah, then you have some element of culpability.
So that was it. That was the last thing that this jury heard. We still have 9 men, 9 women in the box hearing all of the evidence. They were excused for the rest of the day. And ever since Judge Beverly Cannoni told them a few days back to not show any emotion or to whisper amongst themselves, they've been very stoic. And so we couldn't tell what they were thinking, not that we would, but everyone else in the courtroom, we were pretty surprised because Vinnie, by all account, we were under the impression that this guy was going to go all day. This was going to be a shorter day of testimony. He may have spilled into tomorrow, but that was basically it for today. It was a shocking moment.
Absolutely. And I guess it's appropriate in how they close the case out with Karen Reed's own words, which again is the big difference between the first trial and the second trial. The jury's hearing from Karen Reed. And that's difficult for the defense. They've got to figure out a way to explain all of that. Where are we, though? So prosecution rests, exclamation point, the final Karen Reed clip. How much time do we have left in this?
Probably a couple weeks, and I'm going to break it down. I'm going to start with the defense case and what we're going to start with tomorrow. So outside the courthouse here, Karen Reed told myself, the other reporters, that they're looking at probably a week, week and a half. That's in comparison to them only calling 5 or 6 witnesses last year in the first trial. So that's a big deal. Also, I think the first witness is going to be a new witness, possibly a forensic cell phone expert, an engineer perhaps, Matthew DeSorga. So Karen Reed mentioned his name on the steps. I also looked him up, and he matches someone that I was seeing on the first floor of the courthouse here today and yesterday. So he might actually be replacing Dr. Green. We'll have to wait and see. That's the house long to die in the cold cell phone expert that the defense called last year. The other experts that we're anticipating early next week, maybe mid next week, is the ARCA experts, both of them to testify. That's the defense as crash reconstructionists. And of course, Dr. Russell, she is the dog bite expert. We might see Lucky the plow driver once again. But the big question, you already talked about it, the people inside 34 Fairview, we haven't really heard from much of them, including the homeowners, and one of them right there, Brian Albert, and the other one on your screen right there, Brian Higgins. Neither one of them have been called this trial, and that is the defense third-party culprit defense. So that's important. Will they be called? And will Karen Reed take the stand? You know, Vinnie, I asked Karen Reed about it once again today. Let's listen. Karen, what can we expect from the defense? Will you testify?
TBD.
How long will your case last?
1.5 to 2 weeks.
How are you feeling after today?
I feel very good, thank you.
Any attention for Paul? Is that the only way you can get his testimony in at this point, if you do?
It seems that way, yes.
Any decision about Trooper Proctor, Karen?
TBD.
Paul's coming up.
Do you think the ARCA testimony will change at all?
No, will not.
How would you sum up the prosecution's case?
One word.
Unjust.
Okay, so that's what we know about the defense case. Again, all of the attorneys are still under a gag order, but what I know and remember from covering all the pretrial hearings, Vinnie, I know that Hank Brennan said that he plans on a short rebuttal case if, in fact, the defense puts on a case, which is not their obligation to do so, but if they call anyone associated with talking about dog bites. So we know that the rebuttal case will be short and include their dog bite and dog behavior experts.
Okay, so a week and a half to 2 weeks. Historically, every time I hear the defense give an estimate, it's always shorter. So I'm going to be ready at the end of next week. I'm going to be looking at it and saying, okay, it looks like things might be wrapping up. So we're getting relatively close here in a much quicker time. All right, so we're at this important moment, Matt, where we finished the prosecution's case. You're one of the few who's been at the courthouse, in the courtroom for the first trial and for the second trial. So from your perspective, what was the most surprising thing that you took away, heard from the prosecution's case?
I think it has to be their star witness, which is arguably their crash reconstructionist, who is different this year. Remember, we just talked about it. Trooper Paul was the crash reconstructionist last year. I was watching the jury last year. They were shrugging their shoulders, looking at each other. That was the whole pirouette moment with Alan Jackson. It really didn't make a whole lot of sense. And this year, we got some sort of an explanation. I'm not sure if it's a complete explanation, but with the testing by Judson Welcher, doctor with Aperture Company, that was paid $400,000. That includes the $75,000 to buy an identical car, and then also the pants and the clothing that are identical to what the victim was wearing, and the shoes. He did that paint demonstration with that identical car, and he came up with some sort of explanation as to what happened. Take a listen.
So there's been two potential theories that I've seen on that issue. One is a glass was thrown at the rear of the vehicle and shattered it. The second one was an impact to the arm. If the impact is basically more than approximately 8 miles an hour, it will likely break the taillight lens.
Do you have an opinion to a reasonable degree of engineering certainty whether John O'Keefe's injuries on his arm, and inevitably in the back of his head, are consistent with being struck by a Lexus identical to the defendant's Lexus on January 29, 2022?
Yes.
But he didn't account for or couldn't answer really what happened with the SUV and the trigger event going 87 feet rather, in reverse at 24 miles per hour with the impact. And he really didn't explain, or at least I didn't have that takeaway, of how the taillight shattered with a human body. And that's what Karen Reed said on the courthouse steps the other day, is that's the kind of demonstration that she wanted to see, which is the reason why I asked her if we're going to see new information from ARCA. I wonder if that's going to be part of their case. Vinnie?
Yeah, you know, this is coming down to these very specific experts who, in the last trial, the prosecution expert came up very short, and the defense experts were ignored by the jury because the jury didn't know where they came from. This time, I think the jury will be paying attention to both, and both sides have very qualified, experienced experts, and we'll see how it all turns out. Matt Johnson in Dedham. Tomorrow, we'll be talking about day one of the defense case. Thanks so much. All right, let's bring in our think tank, talk about Matt's most surprising moment. Joining me, retired Deputy Public Defender for L.A. County, Philip Dubé. Also with us, trial attorney David Otunga. And finally, criminal defense attorney Sidney Rushing. Great to see everyone tonight. So, you know, Matt was there for the first one. He's there for the second one. And he's saying the most surprising thing is that this new expert that they brought in, more qualified, but still seemed to leave a few questions unanswered, specifically about how this tail light exploded. Philip Dubé, what are your thoughts? It was only going 2 miles an hour backwards. Should they have done an experiment and broken the tail light?
Well, remember, he's only there to illustrate principles and to give probabilities as to what occurred. If you wanted to have a live model, if you will, stand in the way of a car moving at the actual speed, it would have caused tremendous peril to their model. So what you do is you do it in
How about a
slow
crash
motion.
dummy? A crash dummy.
I know. I don't think jurors are moved so much by mannequins and dummies. I think they want to see a real live person. They want to see it move in real time.
Okay.
And he filled in the blanks. But
I'll
what I think
disagree with
really-
you. I think sometimes they're moved by dummies because I won a couple trials. I actually won a couple of trials, Philip, so I moved them, and I'm not the smartest guy.
So that only a couple, though? Does that mean you lost all the other ones?
Well, you know, you win some, you lose. You know, I was a young prosecutor. They don't give you the good ones. David, what are your thoughts here? Did this expert do everything that he could? Like, some of these demonstrations are very memorable. They brought the crash dummy out for the head, yet they didn't throw the SUV that they spent 75 grand on 20 miles an hour, 24 miles an hour in reverse.
Right. And here's one of the things. The crash dummy is right there. So it's not like they didn't have access to one. I want to see a crash dummy get hit by the car. I mean, I understand that the guy did it and he acted and played it off. And then when he was questioned about it, said, well, you know, he didn't want to get hit going 24 miles an hour. Look, I'm a professional wrestler. I wonder how bad it would hurt if I put on like some elbow pads or something. You shouldn't do that. But you have a crash dummy. You definitely have to use this. This is what I want to see. Because while their presentation was great, there's a lot of holes in it, you know? Yeah, you casually hit them. Well, what happens if you smash into them at 24 miles an hour? What if it just hits the hand and there is no pirouette? Like, how do we know? We have to test it. It's the only way for this to be accurate.
Yeah, Sidney, testimony about a tail light exploding is one thing, but seeing it is something else. I mean, did they leave a stone, what is it, turned? So it's not unturned, so it's turned. Like, did they leave something on the table here, an opportunity? Like, these guys were paid $400,000.
Right. I definitely believe that they did. Again, we've seen the crash dummy. They had it. They had the vehicle. They could have saved it for basically their last test and ran it then and had it, you know, hitting the dummy and seeing how it, you know, the body reacts. Because I think that really would have kind of either sealed the deal for them or would have really hurt the deal for them, right? Because what we have is him, you know, the car's going 2 miles per hour. He's kind of positioned in the exact way that he kind of needs his body to be for the results to be what he needs them to be. You know, part of his testimony was that, you know, there's a lot of differences here. If his body was even slightly different, that could have a whole different output. So all we're seeing here is the exact space he needs to be in and the exact, angle he needs to be in for this to fit the injuries on the arm. So I think having the car hit the test dummy would have been much more effective because it would have shown how does this tail light explode.
Philip Dubé, have they left themselves vulnerable to the defense experts to attack the alleged science of the prosecution experts?
Look, I don't care how you slice it. This impact defies the law of physics. Nobody is ever going to be able to show or say where exactly he was at the time of impact and at what angle he got hit. All you can do is, with best practices, align the injuries that are on his body to the hardware on the vehicle, such as the taillight, the spoiler, the bumper, etc. And then what you do is, based on all the algebraic and geometric and telemetric type calculuses, if you will, you come up with a scenario. And the best scenario, I think, is that he got clipped. And how do we know that? Because of Karen Reed.
Yeah, well, that's another story, right?
She flapped her pie hole one too many times, okay? And most important, they have particles of the taillight in his shirt. So how did that get there? You would have to believe that Proctor took that mortar and pestle, grounded it up, and just rubbed it in his shirt while his body was at the coroner.
That's what some of the jurors in the first case believed, because they voted not guilty. But we shall see. All right, think tank staying with us. When we come back, this is the second prosecution, right? So we're going to compare first prosecution versus second prosecution, plus coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates, as the retrial of the century continues, we dissect the alleged timeline of John O'Keefe's murder. Do the times line up, and will the jury believe what prosecutors are alleging? We investigate.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, tonight, 9/8 Central, only on Court TV.
Karen Reed is in the midst of the retrial of the century.
She is factually innocent. She's guilty.
There's something wrong in this county.
Come at me.
The Karen Reed murder retrial. Live coverage weekday mornings, 8/7 Central, on Court TV.
What does he say in that text?
I'm sure the owner of the house will receive some.
And you respond at 10:56 as well as 10:57, is that correct?
Correct.
And what is it that you respond?
My first response was nope. Homeowner is a Boston cop too.
And what, if anything, were you saying, or what was the purpose of that text in regard to the homeowner?
I was just letting him know that essentially Mr. O'Keefe is a Boston cop and the homeowner was a Boston cop as well. Yeah, but there'll be some serious charges brought on the girl.
All right, that's Michael Proctor, former trooper, former lead investigator in the case against Karen Reed. That was him testifying for the prosecution in the 2024 trial. And if you recall, last year after the prosecution case, what were we talking about? We were talking about him, and we were talking about all the people who were inside 34 Fairview, because they were all witnesses in the prosecution case. Take a look if you forgot.
You wrote, yeah, but there will be some serious charges brought on the girl. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And the reason you wrote that is because you knew, as the text above it says, this has to be cut and dry because it involves cops, right?
Objection.
I'm going to allow that. Is that the reason you wrote it?
No, Your Honor.
And then you indicated we're going to put serious charges on the girl. Who did you mean by the girl, by the way?
The defendant.
Karen Reed?
Yes, sir.
So the way that you were going to make it cut and dry, pretty simple. Just pin it on the girl. The fact is, you listed that house for sale for the first time ever in November of 2022, correct?
That's the time we listed it, yes.
Just months after John O'Keefe was found on your lawn.
I did notice behind Sarah and Jen, I did notice something out of the ordinary, like a black blob in the ground by the flagpole.
The defendant kissed me.
And how did she kiss you?
Not like a friend.
How'd you get those injuries? Mr. Albert, we can analyze that.
I was at a party, my house party my senior year, and I remember it being icy out, and it was kind of like a steep hill of a driveway, and I was walking up the driveway, and I slipped down the driveway, and I tried to catch myself, but I had something in my left hand, so I tried to brace myself with my right hand, and I ended up sliding a little bit down the driveway.
At some point, your family got rid of Chloe?
Chloe was rehomed in May.
Did you make any phone calls after you went to bed between the hours of 1:45 a.m. and 6:30 a.m.?
Yes.
Who did you call?
I inadvertently called Brian Higgins.
So according to your phone records, you placed a call to him, and then 17 seconds later, he returned a call to you that lasted 22 seconds. Correct?
That's what the records reflect, yes.
Then you drove to a military base and you threw both the destroyed SIM card and the phone into a dumpster, did you not?
I believe that's what I did, yes.
So these came from me. From all accounts, he didn't do anything wrong. She's a whack job. Yes, she's a babe. Weird Fall River accent, though. No ass.
Remember that? That was the end of the prosecution case. That's all we were talking about. Now, let's flash forward to this year. We're at the end of the prosecution case, and the focus is much different. It's not about Proctor. It's not about the people in the party. It's not about the people inside 34 Fairview. It's about the timeline, digital evidence, and the experts. Take a look.
At 10:53, how many drinks have been served to the defendant at this point?
7.
Objection, Your Honor.
We had statements made by the defendant that she was questioning whether she had hit him.
Sneaker was flushed up against the curb and it was inverted upside down. I believe in total we located maybe 6 or 7 pieces of taillight.
Yes, around 12:31, 56 or 57 is the start of the health event, 36 steps.
How long? How many seconds does that phone move for?
20 seconds.
12:31:56 to 12:32:16?
Correct.
And is that the only time that the phone moves from the point it stops at the flagpole until the next morning?
Correct.
The only time?
Correct.
The only way he could get this kind of an injury was to fall backwards, hit the back of his head, and then the resulting, energy forces going into his brain, into his base of his skull.
The ground was frozen. The soil was frozen, and the surface of the ground was frozen. And it would have made the ground impenetrable. It is consistent with being struck by a Lexus and ultimately contacting a hard surface such as frozen ground.
And does that specifically pertain to January 29, 2022, around 12:30 a.m.?
Objection, Your Honor.
I'm going to allow that.
Yes, it does.
What a difference a year makes. Like where we were, where the jury was focused, where the case was. David Otunga, the bottom line is, whether they proved it or didn't prove it, this is a much different case. This is a much more streamlined, focused case, and it's focused on the crime, the alleged crime in the case. It's not focused on who was in the house and Trooper Proctor.
Right, and it probably should be focused on the crime, but this is what happens when you have the worst witness for the prosecution, probably since O.J. Simpson case, since Mark Furman. I think Proctor is as bad as Mark Furman here. This guy potentially even could have planted evidence. He had the access to that, but you just go through his phone right there. That's reasonable doubt. He says in a text message, just pin it on the girl. And then also there's, him talking crude and the looking for nudes. This guy is a nightmare. So he was such a big part of the prosecution's case the first time. They have no choice but to try to act like he doesn't exist. They don't know anything about him and actually focus on trying to convince the jury that John O'Keefe was even hit by this car. So I don't fault them for going a completely different direction, because you saw how that worked out the first time.
Yeah, I remember speaking with one of the jurors, Sidney, and asked him, what do you think happened? He said, I don't know what happened. Well, that's the job of the prosecution to prove what happened, and that's where the focus was this time around.
So I think this time around, I think they did a better job of trying to focus on that. But I think especially with Trooper Proctor, all you have are all of these witnesses testifying about how he was the lead investigator. And as we know, if I have a client that is either going on the stand or a witness and I have bad facts that are coming from this witness, I'm getting those out of the way, because I think that goes to, way more credible with the jury than it does is if you hide it. So I think right now the jury's sitting here wondering, okay, well, where's this Proctor guy? Where is Proctor, right? And then also what happened is when we had these glass pieces, and, you know, I think the defense did a really good job of showing that these pieces that Proctor found of glass didn't match to anything else except this one piece that was additional part of, you know, the other pieces that were found. So it kind of looks like planting evidence, right? So it's, I don't think that they've hit their mark. Unfortunately, I think they did a better job, I guess, of trying to focus more in on what they needed to. But there's a lot of bad witnesses that I think the defense is going to call. And I think they're going to show the jury that look at what they hid from you. Look what they're hiding. And I think that gives doubt right there.
Philip Dubé, this is night and day in the presentation of these cases. This is a much more simple case, a much more focused case, and I think potentially a much more effective case.
Very much so. In the first case, Vinnie, don't you remember they kept trying to delegitimize the defense in their case in chief? And they spent, I don't know how many weeks just trying to disprove the fact that John O'Keefe ever went into the home. And we all know that the more witnesses you put on the stand to try to prove one fact only creates multiple inconsistencies. And you have all these people who really couldn't coordinate all the details and the facts down to a detail level, unfortunately. So you had different versions of events as to observations, when people arrived, when they left, where cars were parked, and then, you know, the jury was left to guess with what happened. But here, I think it's much cleaner not to put him on, and it's less risky, because now what would happen is if the defense chooses to call him, they cannot ask him leading questions. And I really doubt that the judge is going to declare Proctor to be a hostile witness. Just because a witness is adverse to a party doesn't mean they're hostile. He has to be avoiding answers, being evasive, pretending like he doesn't remember, but just by being adverse naturally doesn't make him hostile. So what does that do? It's fodder for the Commonwealth to be able to rehabilitate him with their own cross. So for example, they'll be able to say, you know, you weren't fired because of corruption. You weren't fired for lying in reports. You weren't fired for perjuring yourself. You were fired merely for being unprofessional. You were never prosecuted. And yes, we don't condone what he did. It was distasteful, but I got to tell you, Vinnie, after years of working in the justice system, I found his texts to be pretty mild. You know, I mean, seriously, you talk to most DAs, defense attorneys, cops in the halls of the courthouses, we all have filthy, potty mouths. And to suggest that everybody talks really like Miss Marianne of Romper Room holding the magic mirror is pure fallacy and fiction. That's just the lore, if you will, of the justice system.
How do they speak in the locker rooms, David?
Yeah, they speak a lot worse than that. I'll tell you, but still, you have Michael Proctor saying, "Pin it on the girl." That was huge for me. And the jury isn't ignoring the fact that we haven't seen this guy. You know, we haven't heard about him. Why? So I think he holds the key. I think the defense absolutely needs to call him, adverse or not. Let's have at it.
All right, David Otunga teeing up our next segment. When we come back, Think Tank stays with us. Who will the defense call? We're going through a long list, and we will figure it out.
Your Honor, the Commonwealth rests.
And with that, it's the beginning of the defense case, and there's a lot of questions. They have 91 witnesses, maybe 95 now, with the supplemental on their list, but how many will they actually call? Let's go through the list with our think tank. Still with us, Philip Dubé, David Otunga, and Sydney Rushing. Okay, I'm going to go through the list. I'm going to throw someone out, and then you raise your hand if you think they're going to testify. Michael Proctor, former state trooper, fired for misconduct in this investigation. Who believes that Michael Proctor and or Elizabeth Proctor, his wife, will testify? We'll begin with Michael Proctor. Who thinks he's going to testify? I have to see the folks. There we go. Who thinks Michael Proctor's going to testify? David does. Why? Why?
I think absolutely the defense calls him. As I was just saying before, I mean, this guy's as bad as Mark Furman. He might have planted evidence. You heard how he was talking about Karen Reed at his phone, looking for nudes. He said, pin it on the girl. There's just too much. There is just too much. This guy, I mean, to say that he was unprofessional is a gross understatement.
All right, Philip, again, why won't they call him? We got to go through a bunch here, so.
The reason why is because he is going to be adverse. In other words, he's not going to corroborate anything that they want to hear, except for the fact that he was unprofessional by saying, yeah, pin it on the girl, looking for nudes, calling her a whack job, calling her the C word, the B word. Big deal. Never once do you hear him say, look, I need you to say this instead of that. I need you to tell the coroner to say it's a homicide. You know, I need you to get down to the coroner's office and sprinkle a little taillight particulate on his jeans. Nothing.
Let's get to the next two. Detective Lieutenant Brian Tully, who is Michael Proctor's former supervisor, was transferred out of the Norfolk County District's office after an internal investigation. And you've got Brian Albert, Boston police officer, the homeowner on 34 Fairview. Who thinks that Tully will be called? Why?
Because especially with the last witness that we just had, there was a lot of questions about what Tully told him and what they talked about. So they may call him to the stand to see what he discussed with other witnesses and if there was a change in their testimony because of that.
All right, Brian Albert, the homeowner. Who thinks he's going to be called? All right, let me go with Philip Dubé. Why not?
To say what? That he was sleeping, snoring away, didn't hear anything, and it didn't even occur to him once he found out what was all the commotion was about on his front lawn that he didn't go out in a whiteout in sub-zero temperatures.
Right. David Otunga, why is he going to be called?
There's the butt dials. There's all of that Philip said. And then there's the butt dials between the two Brians. Like, come on. This has to be addressed. This is ridiculous. He says he called Brian Higgins by accident, but then Brian Higgins calls him back a short while later, who also said it was a butt dial. Not to mention, they both destroyed their cell phones.
All right, Brian Albert Jr. and Brian Higgins, two more Brians. Brian and Nicole Albert's son. The gathering at 34 Fairview was for his birthday celebration, so he was there that night. Brian Higgins, ATF agent, friend of Brian Albert, had some sort of a romantic entanglement with Karen Reed. Who thinks Brian Higgins will be called by the defense? No one. Oh, David does. Okay.
Yeah, Higgins, they got to call Higgins for that entanglement. I can't even say that without laughing. But I love how in the first trial, he actually would, looked a little braggadocious when he was talking about the kiss, and it was more than friends, if you know what I mean. But that whole shady backstory, that provides a potential motive. I don't know how much weight people will give it, but you know what it is? Reasonable doubt. Definitely reasonable doubt.
Sydney, why don't you think they'll call him?
The reason I don't think that they'll call him is because, again, it's the same thing that, we said prior about Proctor and how he's, an adverse witness. He's not going to corroborate anything that they want him to. What are they going to, they could ask him about the cell phones and disposing of them on the military base. And I think that's a little bit of an issue. But they didn't do any further in investigation. And he can't say why they did or didn't.
Okay, next up. Colin Albert and Sergeant Michael Lang. Colin Albert is Chris and Julie Albert's teenage son, attended a party at 34 Fairview. The judges ruled that the defense cannot point the finger at Colin Albert, even though they wanted to. Sergeant Michael Lang, Canton Police Department, jumped in to help Chris Albert once during a fight with two brothers back in 2002. But McCabe and Kerry went to his house, went to Michael Lang's house after John O'Keefe's body was discovered. So who thinks that Colin Albert will be called? No one. Okay. How about Sergeant Michael Lang? Can they call a member of law enforcement? No on both. Philip Dubé, why?
First of all, I think that any input that he might have is just too remote to suggest that this would form the basis of the maid with the candlestick in the library and the whole conspiracy theory. It's ridiculous.
All right, let's get the next one, though. Michael Morrissey, Norfolk County District Attorney, and John O'Keefe's father. Who thinks they're going to call the DA? No one. Who thinks they're going to call John O'Keefe's father? No one. All right, let's get to the big one. Karen Reed, the defendant. Will she take the stand? Who says yes? Why not, Sydney?
I think that she's kind of said enough in her interviews, the things that they've been playing. And I think with her taking the stand, I think it would open her up to way too much exposure. And her even trying to explain herself a little bit is going to look, I think, worse on her.
All
so
right.
I think it's better for her to not testify.
We have 10 seconds. Philip Dubé, why not?
Because she's going to come off looking like an unsympathetic, radioactive, phony opportunist.
Wow.
And I think a jury's going to hate
David
her.
Otunga, 5 seconds.
She doesn't need to because she testifies every day when she walks out of court. Catch it right here on Court TV.
All right. Philip Dubé, David Otunga, Sydney Rushing, thank you so much. When we come back, I'll reveal something else you need to know tonight, plus coming up next hour. Tonight on Vinnie Politan Investigates, the prosecution has a very specific timeline of what happened the night John O'Keefe died. Does it make sense? Tonight, we investigate.
Join Court TV's Vinnie Politan with the latest and breaking true crime stories.
Now, let's look at the other side of all of that.
Vinnie Politan Investigates, coming up next, only on Court TV.
What do we really know about Diddy parties?
Get a new look at the evidence and the latest from inside the courtroom. Vinnie Politan Investigates, a Diddy special report. Wednesday night, 9/8 Central on Court TV.
Welcome back. Time to reveal something else you need to know tonight. Let's take a look at the big board, and the Diddy sex trafficking trial continues. Our coverage continues. Right now, we're going to take a listen to the testimony of Deontay Nash, a celebrity stylist. This is the actual transcript, and we brought in an AI voice.
Mr. Combs signed off on a contract to allow Cassie to do a movie, correct?
Correct.
Yes, sir.
Can you drive it home? Because, yes, I did hook her up with Michael B. Jordan. I know where we're going with this.
Let's...
No.
Hold on. Mr. Donaldson, let's get a new question.
Okay. So, Mr. Nash, you hooked her up with Michael B. Jordan, right?
Indeed.
All righty.
He fine. She fine. I mean, why not? They were broken up. He was at the Revolt Music Conference with Gina.
Okay.
And I was getting thrust to my phone because Cassie found out.
Wait.
Mr. Nash, let Mr. Donaldson ask questions. You give him the answers, and then we'll take it from there.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Donaldson?
Yes. So let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So you were in Miami at the Revolt. Let's break this down, right?
Yep.
And Cassie was in South Africa with Mia, correct?
Correct.
And then it's your information that, not your information, but you observed Mr. Combs with someone else in Miami, correct?
Oh, no. You're not putting that on me. That was another stylist named Icon Tips that texted her and said, "Oh, girl, you look good coming out of the car." And she called me and told me, "Girl, is that girl Gina there?" I said, "I don't know. I ain't seen her because, Puff and Derek would keep me away when Gina was there. Never seen her or met Gina." And that's how that went.
Okay. So another stylist called Cassie in South Africa and thought that she was in the picture that was posted, correct?
No. He thought he actually saw her with Puff.
He thought he actually saw Cassie with Puff?
Yes.
But that wasn't Cassie?
No.
That was Gina?
Yes.
And when Cassie heard that, Cassie got mad?
Yeah.
Cassie got upset, right?
Uh-huh.
She was like, well, why is he out in public with this girl, correct?
Yeah. Why does he keep humiliating me and trying to ruin my career is what she said.
Okay. And she was mad, correct?
Yeah, she was pretty angry. Well, not really.
Our coverage continues. Take a look at your screens, folks. We have a missing child who needs your help tonight. Take a look. This is 17-year-old Bailey Vera, missing from Cleveland, Texas, since May 7th. If you see Bailey, pick up the phone, make a call, make a difference. 911, 1-800-THE-LOST, or you can call the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office in Texas. That number's on your screen right now. Let's get Bailey to a safe place tonight. Don't go anywhere. We have another hour of live true crime. Vinnie Politan Investigates is next. In the meantime, please don't forget to hug the kids.